as you enter the final unit, we're going to be covering the period from the end of the 1960s all the way up to the present. America is going to see continued conflict, but eventually the end of the Cold War, and then enter a brave new world, which will lead us on into the 21st century till today. Now, as the 1960s were drawing to a close, the war in Vietnam was becoming the biggest political issue that America was dealing with. And things were going so poorly there that by 1968, President Lyndon Johnson surprised the nation with the news that he would not seek nor accept the Democratic Party's nomination to serve another term as president. This opened the door for Richard Nixon, the Republican, to rise from his political ashes and become President of the United States. And so, as the 1960s draw to a close and we move into the 70s, Richard Nixon, as President, does a lot of remarkable things. He does have to come up with policies which will bring the war in Vietnam to a close, and you'll be studying about those, and some of those were controversial. He also opens a new period of negotiation with the Soviets, a period of détente, where relations become less tense. We began negotiating with them. The SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, kind of relaxes the world's concerns about a nuclear war. He opens relations with China, begins negotiating with them. But with all the changes that he makes, his term as president comes to an abrupt halt during his second term with the Watergate scandal. A break-in at the Democratic National Headquarters and the cover-up that followed. Eventually, the trail led all the way to the White House, and as you'll study, Richard Nixon eventually was forced to resign as the President of the United States. Now, his resignation was just one of many problems that we experienced throughout the 1970s. There's mistrust in our government. Our politicians can't be trusted. There is growing problems with the economy. Gas prices are rising. Inflation. America, now that we've lost in Vietnam, America is becoming less influential around the world. People are no longer as scared of us as they once were. The Soviets, by the end of the decade, will be invading Afghanistan. And with nothing more than a slap on the wrist from us, we don't send our athletes to the Summer Olympics in Moscow. That's all we really could muster. The Iranians take American hostages during a revolution there. America is going through a troubled decade. And Presidents Ford and Carter really aren't able to do anything to change the deteriorating situation for America. And so in 1980, Americans were looking for somebody to save us, to make us strong again. And in 1980, Ronald Reagan, an actor from California, became our new president. Reagan's Republican economic policies, really the same type of policies that you've been studying since the Gilded Age period. Supply-side economics is his answer to fixing the economy. And you'll study what supply-side economics, this trickle-down effect of giving tax breaks and benefits to businesses, to the wealthy, so that they can reinvest them, and then hopefully that will create more jobs and bring down prices, which will trickle down and benefit everyone. That's the policy he follows, and you can decide for yourself as you look at it if it was successful or not. He also strengthens the United States, builds up our military, challenges the Soviets, but also enters a dialogue with the new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. And eventually, a stronger America and the changes going on in the Soviet Union eventually bring the collapse of communism at the end of the 1980s and early 90s. First, the Berlin Wall falls, and Eastern European countries are liberated from communism. then the Soviet Union itself ceases to be a communist nation. Even China almost has a revolution. Communism is waning. The Cold War is ended. But as we leave this Cold War period, America enters a new period. As George Herbert Walker Bush, Reagan's vice president and our next president, said we were going to be seeking a new world order. No longer would it be a struggle between the communists and the free world. Now, who knew what was going to be in store, as no longer all the countries of the world were lining up in one party or the other. And that meant that there would be some different type of challenges to be faced. The biggest challenge that America faced in the early 90s, when Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi nation invaded Kuwait, Bush led an international coalition to stand up to him and demand that he leave Kuwait. And the Gulf War was fought. However, even though Bush was popular during the Gulf War and afterwards, as the economy took a downturn and he failed to live up to his promise of no new taxes, which he had promised in his campaign, the Republicans finally lost the Oval Office, and a Democrat, William Jefferson Clinton, became the new president in 1992. Clinton would be most famous for successfully balancing the budget and helping to stabilize and fix the American economy. But throughout his whole presidency, he would be troubled by ongoing investigations led by the Republican Congress into his personal affairs, eventually digging up the dirt, linking him to Monica Lewinsky, the third of a number of women he was linked to. And that eventually led to him lying under oath about his relations with this young woman, and that led to an impeachment hearing. Although he was not kicked out of office, he was only the second American president ever to be impeached. And that probably did weaken the Democratic Party a little bit. And so in the 2000 election, in one of the closest elections in American history, George W. Bush narrowly defeated Al Gore to become President of the United States. Bush would be dealing with some things which no American president had dealt with before. We were no longer in the Cold War. Instead, it wasn't nations that we'd be having to square off against, but terrorism. On September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the World Trade Centers, the Pentagon, killing Americans that they hijacked on board these planes, which they used as missiles. And America entered a new war, the war on terror. And so America sent troops and went after the terrorists in Afghanistan. We also eventually became involved in another war in Iraq. American opinion was split on some of these issues about where we should be fighting, who we should be fighting. And eventually, as George W. Bush's second term of office drew to a close, America would shift its focus from the war in Iraq, eventually during the new president, Barack Obama's administration, begin starting to shift the focus to the war in Afghanistan, although we still have troops in Iraq. We also began shifting our focus more to problems here at home, especially to issues such as health care, which has most recently in the news been one of the biggest struggles for Obama and his administration. And so as you look at this final unit, look at the changes which occur to bring America to where we are today, and to leave us with the issues that we're dealing with in the 21st century.